four women impressionists.
You have probably heard of Monet, Renoir, and Degas, who are famous impressionists. Less well known are Mary Cassatt, Bertha Morisot, Eva Gonzalez, and Marie Brockman, who were women members of the Circle and exhibited works that were as innovative as those of their male counterparts. Because of the cultural ideologies of the 19th century, women artists, artistic educations, access to different environments, acceptable subjects, conventional ideas of acceptable behavior, and critiques by art critics were different than male artists. Please look for how the cultural norms affected their lives and the commonalities and differences of these four women impressionists.
Mary Stephenson Cassatt was born on May 22, 1844 in Pennsylvania, in a city now known as Pittsburgh. She was born into a high social standing family and was the daughter of a real estate and investment broker. Her early schooling prepared her to be a proper wife and mother and included classes such as homemaking, embroidery, music, sketching, and painting. At the age of 16, in 1860, she enrolled at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Unfortunately, the male faculty and students patronized and resented her attendance. In 1862, she left the program and went to Europe. In 1865, she convinced her parents to let her go to Paris to study. She began private lessons in art at the Louvre. She received private lessons from painter Jean-Léon Gérôme. She copied works of old masters and sketched. She stayed in Currents and studied with Edouard Frère and Paul Sawyer. She submitted a painting to the Paris Salon with the name Mary Stephenson, and in 1868 she was accepted with the painting The Mandolin Player. It was the first time her work was represented there. She briefly returned to Philadelphia in the late summer of 1870, where her father was disapproving of her career and wouldn't pay for anything that was connected to her art. In order to help raise funds, she tried to sell some of her paintings in New York, but it didn't work out. She tried again through a dealer in Chicago, but they were tragically destroyed in a fire in 1871. That same year, she returned back to Europe after being commissioned to paint 2 copies of Correggio's works. She was working with the advice of Carlo Raimondi. In 1872, Cassatt spent 8 months in Parma, Italy, studying paintings of Correggio and Parmigianino. In 1873, Cassatt visited Spain, Belgium, and Holland to study and copy the works of Velázquez, Rubens, and Hals. In June 1874, she settled in Paris, where she began to show regularly in the Salon. Her parents and sister Lydia joined her in 1877. That same year, Edgar Degas invited her to join the group of independent artists later known as the Impressionists. She was the only American to become a member in the group. She was mainly interested in figure compositions. Her first works focused on the world of social interactions. Cassatt was drawn to painting women in everyday domestic settings. Cassatt rejected the idea of becoming a wife and a mother and embraced independence. She made a profitable and successful career painting women as subjects, not objects. During the late 1870s and early 1880s, the subjects of her works were her family, especially her sister Lydia, the theater, and the opera. She later made specialty of her best-known theme, portraits of mother and child. Aside from using oil paints, she also used pastels and made prints. Cassatt exhibited over 11 paintings with the Impressionists. Towards the end of her life, diabetes began to steal her vision, which led to her decrease of work after the 1900s. She gave up printmaking in 1901 and stopped painting in 1904. Years later, at the age of 82 and in almost complete blindness, she died on June 14, 1926, at her country home. This painting is called Breakfast in Bed, and it is oil on canvas and was done in 1897. This is my favorite painting by Cassatt, and according to people, the mother's position and eyesight differs to her daughter's because of her protective nature. The child's gaze is to the world beyond her and implies her curiosity to it all. To me, the mother doesn't seem to just be protective, but also maybe tired. She looks very young, and like the child might have wore her out or woken her too early. This piece is mostly white, yet their faces and body parts stand out enough without looking out of place. It has a sense of peace.
Berthe Marie Pauline Morisot was born on January 14, 1841, in Bourges, France. Her father was a senior government administrator, and her mother was actually related to the Rococo painter Jean-Honoré Fragonard. She had 2 older sisters and 1 younger brother. She was born into the upper middle class family, so she was greatly encouraged along with her sisters to learn how to paint. Berthe and her sister Edma received artistic education through painter Joseph Guichard, who took them to the Louvre to observe and duplicate art. She met Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot, who was a key part in Morisot's career. He influenced her to start plein air painting, which basically explains itself in plein air, or painting outside and being a part of the atmospheric moment. She gets accepted to the Paris Salon in 1864 at only 23 years old, and since then her work was exhibited quite a few times throughout the years at the Salon. Her work consists of landscapes. She meets Edouard Manet and introduces him to plein air painting. In 1874, she joins the Impressionists and exhibits her work for the very first time as an official Impressionist painter. From that point on, history was made as she continued on to exhibit her work countless times throughout the years instead of the Salon. Domestic scenes and womanhood, and more from oil painting, watercolor, and pencil. She married Edouard's younger brother, Eugene Manet, a former painter, a few years after. Their first and only child, Julie, was also born in 1878. Overall, Berthe Morisot is one of the greatest female artists alongside these women impressionists in art history for not only their remarkable talents, but also for stepping out of artistic norms and shedding a beautiful light on Impressionism. Philip Berdy says it himself, and I quote, "Madame Berthe Morisot handles both palette and paintbrush with truly surprising delicacy. Not since the 18th century, not since Fragonard, have such pale colors been applied with so much boldness and spirit." End of quote.
Eva Gonzalez was born in 1849 in Paris. She grew up in an intellectual and bourgeois, meaning upper middle class, environment. At age 16, she was trained in drawing and the art of pastel by Charles Chaplin, a portraitist and pastelist. Edouard Manet was a major figure in the avant-garde art scene. In 1869, she modeled for him and met Berthe Morisot, another of his models. Gonzalez became Manet's only formal student. Gonzalez never exhibited her work in any of the Impressionist exhibitions, but because of her painting style, she is identified with the group. Her painting, The Child of the Trope, was accepted into the Salon of 1870. Until 1872, she was strongly influenced by Manet, but later developed her own more personal style. She progressively distanced herself from Manet's influence, lightening her palette little by little. By 1872, she was a regular exhibitor at the Salon. She achieved recognition for a series of large format genre paintings. Gonzalez also used watercolor. Her pastels may well be her most successful works. Gonzalez's work faced criticism because of what audiences and critics claimed were overt similarities to the style of Manet, which at that time was considered somewhat crude. Particularly in 1874, A box at the Italian Theater was rejected by the official jury of the Salon for its masculine vigor, which led them to reject it with questions as to her painting's authenticity. The art critic Maria Durazmez championed Gonzalez for producing paintings which challenged the way female painters were viewed and separated from the art scene in Paris. Gonzalez reworked this painting and resubmitted it. It was accepted in 1879 and described as one of the most provocative paintings of its day. Gonzalez married Henri Girard, an engraver and painter, in 1879. Her art evolved from scenes of domestic life to a new perspective of women. Gonzalez painted emotions without the romantic sentimentalism of her colleagues. Her painting's characteristics are light and brilliant tones, with whites of women's dresses predominating. The richness of detail and absence of elaborate backgrounds lead the observer's eye to the principal element of her works, the female body. Through her vision of women, Gonzalez introduced a new element into the Impressionist world, femininity. Sadly, she died from an embolism at age 34, shortly after the birth of her son. Her areas of flat color would fuel explorations by others. Marie Brockmann was born in 1840 in Argentan, France. Unlike the three other women, Brockmann did not enjoy the opportunities of a prosperous and cultured family. She was once trained by Jean-Auguste Dominique Ingres, but found his attitudes toward female painters intimidating and frustrating. She left his studio. At the very young age of 17, Brockmann had a painting accepted into the Salon of 1857. In 1859, more of her work was exhibited at the Salon. Her paintings were regularly accepted for the Salon after 1864. She married Felix Brockmann, an artist and engraver, in 1869. They had one child named Pierre a year later. Her already delicate health deteriorated after her son's birth. She combined the roles of mother, as she cared single-handedly for her son, as well as artist and wife, to a self-absorbed and domineering husband. In 1876, she designed plates for dinner services. Felix taught her etching, but she was not successful. Unlike many of her Impressionist contemporaries, Brockmann prepared in a traditional way through sketches and drawings. The Lady in White was her last painting in the classical technique. She executed large faience, which is tin glazed earthenware, tile panels depicting the Muses. It was her largest and most ambitious work. It was designed for the 1878 World Exposition in Paris. It marks her transition from her previous style to Impressionism. She showed her artworks with the Impressionists in 1879, 1880, and 1886, which delighted critics and fellow artists. 1880 marks a period of rapid stylistic change in her works. To her husband's disgust, Edgar Degas, Auguste Renoir, and Claude Monet became her mentors. She socialized with them and other Impressionist artists. Monet's influence encouraged her to renounce her Ingresque style of painting with its dark tones and smooth-licked surfaces in favor of the Impressionists' lighter tones and freer brushstrokes. In 1886, Paul Gauguin taught her how to prepare her canvas in order to achieve the intense tones she now desired. From 1887 to 1890, Brockman's plein air outdoor portraits, landscapes, and still lifes progressively adopted the style of the Impressionists. Her canvases grew larger and colors intensified. Brockman approached the interpretation of her human subjects with particular empathy for their individuality. She caught the emotional and intimate essence of her sitters. Felix didn't appreciate her shift away from the style of Ingres. In face of her husband's opposition, Marie gradually abandoned painting after 1890. In keeping with typical bourgeois tradition, she was relegated to the background and to obeying her husband's wishes. Sadly, she died as a recluse in 1916. Out of the four Impressionists we covered, Brockman's work most closely resembles the traditional style of Impressionism we know. Her principal contribution was a particular modulation of color and brushstroke. She used a restricted palette of 8 to 9 basic colors that, without being physically mixed, became fused by optical effect of short, juxtaposed brushstrokes producing hundreds of different hues. The four women artists in this presentation responded to Impressionism in individual ways. Although they never formed an exclusive women's group, they did associate with each other professionally and personally. Their individual struggles for acceptance as women artists is perhaps the most moving element of their stories. Each woman wrestled with balancing personal lives with the demands of art. Gonzalez died at age 34. Brockman withdrew entirely in her prime because of an unsympathetic husband. Morisot termed widowhood the positive stage of life. Only Cassatt, a wealthy and independent spinster with a forceful personality, forged a successful and acclaimed career in her long lifetime. These remarkable artists overcame many barriers to influence artists for generations to come.